Hello and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. Today I was going to cover the topic of planet retrogression, also known as Vakri in Sanskrit, and this is from a Vedic astrology or Jyotish perspective. Okay, so if you're new to Vedic astrology, Jyotish, or my videos, all of my teaching videos on the subject are my concepts playlist. They can all be found there. And wherever you see a double asterisk in one of my talks, that means I have a teaching video on that topic if you'd like to learn more. So videos related to this one, I would say. Benefic and Malefic planets are Grahas. If you don't know which are which, I have a whole playlist on each of the planets or Grahas and their symbolism. That can be important. I have a growing playlist on each house or bhava and the symbolism. Also, this is primarily an astronomy video, and I have a playlist on astronomy related to Jyotish. And like I have lunar and solar eclipses, Chandra, Surya, Grahan, and also planet velocities or Graha, Vega. So some of these other astronomy videos may be interesting to you. You can check them out in the playlist. Okay, so planet retrogression, also known as Vakri in Sanskrit. So we're going to talk about astronomy and interpretation. Okay, so retrogression, the definition really is it's essentially an optical illusion that a planet appears to be going backward in the sky, and we're talking, this is relative to the fixed stars in the sky. So you can kind of think about like if you're sitting on a train that's moving forward, and that train is moving forward and it passes another train that's also moving forward, but the train that you're passing is just going slower. It's temporarily going to seem like the slower train is actually going backward, but even though it's going forward. So it's kind of a similar phenomenon that's happening in the sky. All right, so this happens whenever the Earth laps a true planet. And the true planets are Mercury, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn. So those are the only planets that actually are considered retrograde in this particular definition. Okay. Um, for example, when you have the Earth and it sits between the Sun and one of the outer planets, and the outer planets are the slowest planets, so Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, you will get this phenomenon. So if you look at the right here in the diagram, in the center you have the Sun, and then around the Sun you have these like kind of three green spheres on a loop, a white loop here. That's kind of E1, E2, and E3 refers to Earth 1 position, Earth 2 position, and Earth 3 position. Okay. And then the outer circle, that bright red little circle there is Mars. Okay. And so you can see this green arrow, curved arrow is the directionality here. So just imagine if the Earth is one of these green spheres and it's slowly moving clockwise from E1, E2, and E3. Now, what would Mars look like in the sky relative to the Earth? Okay, that's what you have to consider. That's what we're talking about with retrogression. So, from E1 position, Mars is going to seem like it's ahead of Earth. Okay. But it's still going to seem like at that position that Mars is moving forward. Once Earth catches up to Mars and they're about in the same position, then it's going to start to look like Mars is going backwards. Even though they're both moving forward, it's just relative to how fast the Earth is going, it's going to look like Mars is going backward or retrograde. Okay. And then once the Earth moves into the E3 position, then yeah, Mars is definitely like way behind it. Yeah. So again, but then once E3 gets back to E1, then it's gonna, when you start to turn in that direction, then it's gonna look like Mars is going progressive again in the kind of normal, typical direction. Right? So, what does all this astronomy mean for interpretation? Well, the first thing to remember is that again, classical Vedic astrology, Jyotish, was all the basis of it was all created or come up with thousands of years ago before there was any technical devices to help with viewing the planets. So all of this was just stuff related to what the naked eye could see in the sky. So the thing is that when a planet is going retrograde, that means that the Earth is very close to that planet. and that planet is far from the sun. So the planet's close to us, but far from the sun. And when a planet's far from the sun, it actually reflects more of the sun's light relative to us. Okay, so it's kind of an optical thing. Like, when is a planet going to look brightest to us is when it's actually farthest from the sun, but closest to us. Okay, because it's going to be a little bit bigger to our eye, but it's also going to reflect more of um, uh, the light of that planet from the sun. Almost like a full moon. You can kind of think about it that way, right? Because a full moon, it's brightest when the moon is farthest from the sun. Same thing with these other planets. Okay. Okay, so nearest to us means brightest, means strongest, and interpretation-wise, it means these planets are going to be more influential when they're retrograde. Now, that influence can be good or bad. Okay, now I know in the States, typically, we hear a lot about Mercury retrograde if you listen to anything related to astrology. And, there's often this sort of like negative connotation to that. It doesn't have to be negative. It depends on somebody's chart, really. But the influence is stronger. That's for sure. I think that's common in both Western astrology and uh, Vedic astrology. But again, from a Vedic perspective solely, the retrograde influence is stronger, good or bad. Okay. And the good or badness depends on, or let's say the good or badness affects primarily the houses owned by the planet. That's retrograde. And it influences primarily the Karaka. So the Karaka is a symbol of the planetary symbol. So, for example, since we've been talking about Mars, let's keep Mars here. So, when Mars is retrograde, Mars is a malefic planet. So, generally, we're thinking probably, potentially negative effects here. But if Mars owns a positive house, that would bring more benefit. So, like maybe Mars is your ascendant or your Lagna, your rising sign, right? First house. These are all different. These are the same thing. So, if Mars is your ascendant and you have a retrograde Mars or Mars is going retrograde, that should actually bring some power to the first house. Okay, and now if there are other things going on, like maybe Mars is retrograde and combust, now you would have to add in another layer of interpretation of the combustion, which is a whole different thing. Yeah. If there are other planets, conjoined with Mars or aspecting Mars, you would have to consider that as well. If Mars is debilitated or not, or exalted, you'd have to figure that in as well. Okay. So if we're just sticking with this in a very simplified form, areas that you want to look for that are going to be most influenced by retrogression are the houses that are owned by the planet. And again, all of these, the true planets, Mercury, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Sun, each of those owns two houses. So they're each going to affect especially two houses. And then the Karaka. So again, whatever the planet symbolizes. So again, if we're sticking with Mars here, Mars represents things like courage. Mars represents things like siblings. Mars represents things like enemies. So you can see that um, if since Mars on its own is a malefic planet, if Mars, for example, owns houses that are considered positive, we might be looking more at an increase in courage. If the houses that Mars owns are negative, we might be considering more like enemies, that sort of thing. Okay. So, what also helps us decide if there's going to be a positive effect or a negative effect? Okay. So, the more positive effect you're going to see is if it's a benefic planet or Graha, right? I have a whole video on what's benefic and malefic planets or Grahas because it depends. Some of them are clearly negative and some are positive, but some switch, like Moon and Mercury switch, and I go into like when they switch, yeah. The other thing is that if the planet is owner of positive houses or bhavas, okay, and then on the flip side, The more negative influence is that if it's a malefic planet or Graha, and that malefic planet or Graha, especially, it's going to be even more negative if that malefic planet is the owner of a negative house or bhava. So they're going to be it's a whole gradation of like more and more positive, more and more negative. Yeah. So that's pretty much it as far as Vedic astrology goes. Now I know there's other stuff going on, in Western astrology, so I'll touch on that a little bit. But before I do, let me just mention that Jupiter and Saturn go retrograde about once a year. Mars goes retrograde once every 2 years. Venus goes retrograde about once every 18 months, and Mercury goes retrograde about 3 times a year. Okay. So let's talk about Mercury retrograde a little bit to compare, contrast Vedic astrology um, with Western astrology. Now, again, I'm not an expert on Western astrology, but I have not heard this sort of interpretation of like, benefic or malefic planets and ownership of houses as having anything to do with Mercury retrograde. When I see Mercury retrograde, at least in public media, maybe not like true deep Western astrology, it's like, oh, be careful, don't sign anything, don't sign contracts or double check your contracts, um, review everything, review details. So the thing though is that, see, part of that does relate to the Vedic astrology. Because when you're talking about contracts, when you're talking about details, when you're talking about business, when you're talking about travel, those are all, Mercury is a karaka or symbol for all of those things. And so those things can be affected when Mercury goes retrograde. But the thing is, again, you have to figure out like what's the condition of Mercury, other, you know, conditions like is it exalted, is it debilitated, right? And then is it in a negative house? Does it own a negative house? Does it own a positive house? And then you have to sort through and integrate all that to figure out like which way is it going to go. Especially because Mercury can go either way. Sometimes it's a benefic and sometimes it's a malefic planet. Yeah. So, and then also sort of, in keeping with that, just like in my own life, I kind of know when Mercury retrograde is happening because, for me at least, in my life, and this may not be true for everybody, um, I usually know that Mercury's retrograde because, one, random people from my past will usually pop up. Um, Now, random people from the past. So, this could be like friends and like, business associates or classmates and things like that, which are all things that Mercury represents. So, Mercury is a karaka for friends and work colleagues, school mates, and things like that. So that makes sense. But what is this like random people returning from the past? Well, part of it may be my Mercury is related to my 12th house. And the 12th house is related to like losses. So people that have been lost, but again, that just could be my life because that's my chart. Okay. So if you don't have Mercury related to your 12th house, that may not be true for you. But you can see how Mercury picks up not only the karaka, but it also picks up the symbolism of the house that it's related to. Okay. All right. And I think I mentioned the word progressive. So the opposite of retrogression is progressive. So when we say, oh, Mercury's ending its retrograde time, we can say, oh, Mercury's going progressive. So just to know the complementary term. And then, just to make sure we're all clear here, Sun and Moon never go retrograde. And Rahu and Ketu are always retrograde. And also remember, Rahu and Ketu are shadow planets. They're mostly they're calculations. They're not actually planets with mass. But based on their calculation, they move in a retrograde fashion all the time. Okay, and if you have software like sometimes there's a specific mark with the planet, like with the software I use. Like if you see any of my interpretation videos with when I have a full birth chart, that I flip and paste or whatever. Um, um, when you see an underline underneath a planet, that means that planet is retrograde. So I don't know about other software systems, but the software system I use does that. Okay, so short and sweet, but still very important here. And then I have another diagram in case that helps, just to really solidify this concept, because it can be fairly abstract. So here's another diagram, and this diagram makes most sense if you start at the bottom. Okay, so again, sun is in the middle, and then we have this ring of Earth as it's moving upwards. So you start at the bottom here. And then on the outside here, the red planet, this is Mars. So again, we have sun in the middle, Earth between sun and Mars on the outside here. Okay, so if we start with the bottom Earth and we look towards the bottom Mars, because again, they're both moving up. Yeah, but Earth is moving a little bit faster. So when this bottom Earth looks at Mars, and you keep, extrapolating out here, you'll see that Mars is going to be in this kind of one. You'll see this little one out here with this kind of loop-de-loop, pattern of Mars. That's what we're going to see, you know, again, in relationship to our relative position to Mars. Okay. So Mars is going to be in this one position. Then as Earth and Mars keep moving, we're going to get a little bit closer to Mars, but it's still going to be ahead of us, and we're still moving in the same direction. So Mars is going to move up. So we go from 1 to 2, and that's fine. That seems normal. And then when we get closer to Mars, we're not quite there yet. Then it's going to be like Mars is slowing down. Okay. So, and then it might kind of skew a little bit. So we're going to get 1, 2, and 3. Now, I don't know how much skewing there actually is. This might just be for the sake of the diagram. Okay. I'm not an astronomer, so I don't know that detail, but I'm just guessing to make, because otherwise, how do you go back and forth? Because they would be on top of each other. So, so we're gonna have Mars 1, Mars 2, Mars 3. So if we had like a time differential somewhere in here, probably 1 and 2 would be farther apart, and then 3 would be closer, because it would look like Mars isn't moving quite as far, relatively speaking, because we're starting to get close to Mars, and we're going to pass Mars up. Okay, then if we look at the middle Earth here with this like green arrow, highlighting it, then we're going to start to see we've just passed Mars. Then Mars is going to seem like it's behind us. So it's like Mars was ahead of us, and now it's behind us. And then as we keep, outpacing Mars, then we're going to move from move up to the next Earth position, and then it's going to be, this Mars 5. And then when we really pass Mars, we're like, really ahead of it. Then we're both going to be moving forward, but now it looks like Mars is also moving the same direction. So we're going to get like 5, 6, 7. Okay, so again, this is what we relatively see, if you're somebody who stands outside and, can see the stars and planets every night, you would see again based on the backdrop. So like, what would be nice in this, diagram, although it would make it probably more complicated, is if you had like a constellation in here like Leo or something. So you could see like Mars like moving, over the course of this retrograde. Mars depends on the retrograde, but usually a few weeks. So this little loop-de-loop thing would be happening over the course of a few weeks typically. Like Mercury retrograde is about 3 weeks. Mars can be a little bit longer because Mars is, does its own kind of thing. The other thing to know is that Mars is sometimes called Vakri because it has a crooked path. Okay, so don't confuse those two terms. Vakri is the crooked one because and that's the crooked pattern, quote unquote crooked pattern of Mars. That's what gives Mars that kind of connotation or symbolism of being rebellious, because it goes against the grain. It does its own thing. It doesn't follow the usual rules or patterns. Okay, so that's retrogression. All right, so as always, I want to thank you for stopping by and listening to one of my talks. All of my teaching videos on the subject of Vedic astrology are in my concepts playlist. If you're interested in a personal birth chart reading, I offer those on Zoom. You can email heartlightastro@yahoo.com for more info on that. I also have another YouTube channel on natural medicine, which includes other Vedic arts such as Ayurveda and yoga, as well as other paradigms of medicine like homeopathy and naturopathic medicine. And the name of that channel is called Nature Source Care. So that's out there as well if that's interesting to you. So as always, I hope you found this interesting and useful as you navigate the energy cycles of your own life. So until the next one, take care. Namaste.